Welcome to Jhart Modelworks. In this video we're going to finish up everything remaining in the engine bay and add a couple of personal touches. Welcome to my workbench. Let's get started. In a previous video I showed you how to build an Optima style battery. I'll leave a link to that video in the description below. Now we're going to detail it up and add it to the Chevelle. I created a set of DIY decals for the labels using white waterslide decal paper. I'll put a link to the file for these in the description also so you can print your own if you want. These aren't the highest quality, but there's only so much you can fit into a 3mm circle. In order to get white in your decals, you have to use white decal paper. But because the whole sheet is decal film, when you go to use them, you have to cut right up on the design or you'll get a white border around the decal when you put it down. Again, we've got to cut right up on the decal, so we're going to get as close as possible. And then we're just going to put these down with a regular micro set, a micro saw as necessary. Now we need to add some battery cables. I have the Detail Masters battery set, and we're going to use the battery terminals from it and some 30 gauge red and black electrical wire. We're just going to cut off a terminal from the photo etch fret, cut a segment of wire off. We're going to put a little bit of glue on the wire, and then we're going to touch it to the end of the photo etch terminal. Once we have the cable built, we'll add a little more glue, and then we'll carefully slide the hole in the photo etch terminal over the wire we used for the battery post. Positive cable done, we're going to repeat that process using some black cable for the negative. Now we'll just give our wires a quick little bend so they run down the front of the battery, and then we'll curve them off to the side before we go to glue it in. Looking pretty good. We're just going to drop a little glue down here on the bottom, and we're going to press it down into the spot where the original battery should have gone. Once the glue is set, we'll just route the cables back along the fender. If you want to be more accurate, you could make these longer and run the red wire to the starter and the black wire to a bolt on the block, but when we run heater hoses later, they're going to cover these up, so I'm just going to tuck these in here. Moving to the firewall, I have no idea what this part is, but it gets glued here next to the master cylinder. And now we'll work on the master cylinder itself. We're going to drill a 0.4mm hole in both of the ports on the side of the master cylinder. We're then going to glue in some 26 gauge jewelry wire. 24 gauge would be better, but I don't have any right now. We'll then just add a little bend here to run these down to the engine bay and let them disappear. And we'll repeat again with another piece of wire for the other circuit for the brakes. Next, we're going to glue the master cylinder to the brake booster. And then the brake booster goes on the firewall as well. Protect makes some really nice heater hose. It's perfectly scaled and it isn't overly shiny, so it really looks the part. We're going to start by making a rough measurement from where the firewall should be to a little past the front of the engine bay. That should give me enough to make any necessary bends without being overly wasteful. Next, we're going to drill 2 holes, one on top of the other in the firewall. I think it was a 0.9mm hole. I use reference photos from auction sites like bringatrailer.com or eBay Motors to locate where these go. People will take photos of every inch of a car when they're trying to sell it. And before we go any further, we're going to go ahead and glue the firewall into place. Now we're going to run the lower heater hose from the bottom hole in the firewall to a hole we drilled on the side of the water pump on the front of the engine. Once we have it bent the way we want it, we'll strip the ends and glue one end of the firewall. And then we'll glue the other end in place on the water pump. We're basically going to repeat the process for the upper hose, although I do it a little different this go around. I start by fitting one end of the firewall and then bend the wire to shape. I want to run it along the fender here. And I'm going to end it at a hole in the intake manifold, again using those reference photos. Now that it's bent mostly to shape, I'm going to go ahead and cut it off and strip the other end. So I'm going to work this end back into the firewall. We're going to get everything bent into shape and tucked into place. And then we're just going to glue that in place from the back side. I should have done it this way on the other one. It would have been a little cleaner. And we'll glue this into the intake manifold. Those look really nice, and it's a really nice bit of detail to add to the engine bay. Charlie from ProTech also sent us one of his ignition coils. It comes with the turned aluminum coil and a bit of boot material. This bit of photo etch is a piece I had left over from somewhere, but it fits perfectly to make a mounting bracket, but a thin strip of aluminum can, or even bare metal foil can work as well. We bent the metal strip around the coil to shape it. We added a little glue to the inside and wrapped it around the coil. And we'll add a touch of glue to the top and just hold it all together with some pliers to cure. Just a quick test measure so we know where to cut the coil wire. We're going to glue the boot onto the coil. We'll then glue the coil onto the coil wire. And finally, we're going to glue the coil onto the firewall. Got a little heavy-handed with the glue there. Just going to straighten it up and press it in place. There you go. You can do it. And that adds a lot of extra realism. Now we're going to move to the front of the engine bay and knock out the radiator. I've sanded down the top of the radiator cap to remove the seams so we can replace it with one of these caps from Small Great Details. We're going to start by gluing the radiator to the core support. Now when we go to glue the fan cover, we need to make sure that the wide side goes to the left, otherwise the opening will not sit correctly over the fan. Unfortunately, my battery died while I made the lower radiator hose, but you'll see the process later when we do the upper hose. Using the braided line from Protect lets me make a hose and glue it in place, but I can still bend and flex it to get it glued in place on the water pump. We're going to cut off one of the photo etch radiator caps and we'll glue it in place on top of the radiator. I like using a blob of blue tack to handle these small photo etch parts. Next, we're going to drill a 0.4mm hole in the neck right under the radiator cap. We're going to strip the end off a bit of 30 gauge wire and glue that in for the overflow tubing. Now we'll just bend that down and glue that in place. It's time to glue the radiator assembly onto the chassis. You want to watch this part, as for me the driver's side wanted to pop out of its socket, so make sure it stays in place so everything fits right when you mount the body. It's a bit of a tight fit in here, but using some tweezers we're going to position the other end of the lower radiator hose and glue it into the water pump. Guess Justin, the fan still spins. This is the upper radiator hose. It's not bad, but I want to replace it with some braided line. The fittings, however, are quite nice, so I'd like to keep them. I've bent the braided line to match the curves of the original kit part. We're going to mark it just about here to cut just a little past the fitting. This will give us a little room to strip and expose the wire cord. Next, we want to cut the fitting ends off the kit part and we'll drill a hole in the center of the fitting. Try to get as centered as possible and watch your angle here so you don't come out through the side. Now we're going to add a little glue to the exposed core. I like to let it touch the braiding to reduce fraying, and then we're going to glue the fitting onto the end. We're going to repeat that process for the fitting on the other end of the hose that connects to the intake manifold. Now we're going to add a little super glue to this end and glue it to the radiator. After that, we'll add a little glue to the opening on the intake manifold, and we can bend and move the end of our hose into place. And that's going to wrap up the engine bay. I think that battery stands out a lot better than the old Delco one from the kit, and the added hoses and braided lines really finish out the engine compartment. In next week's video, we're going to wrap the build up with final assembly. I'm really happy with how this kit's coming along. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. Also, feel free to leave comments, feedback, critique, or anything else in the comments section below. I enjoy interacting with all my viewers in the comments section and try to reply to all the comments I receive. If you want to catch future videos, please consider subscribing to my channel and make sure you click the bell notification icon so you can be notified when I upload new videos. As always, thank you for watching, keep modeling, and have a great day.